So I know I said I wasn't going to talk about Joe Rogan anymore because we've all been guilty of making those videos where we think that Joe Rogan is about to break from MAGA and is about to break from Donald Trump. But then when you really go listen to the entire interview, you'll figure out that really all he did was just maybe criticize Cash Patel or criticize Pam Bondi or ask questions or say something sounds crazy to him or sounds insane. But he never ever goes hard in the paint against Trump. And just when you think he might be starting to turn around, he goes way back to the other side real quick. So that's why I said, you know what? I'm just not really going to give much attention to this dude, and I'm just going to go on about my day. And then I stumbled across this clip of Joe Rogan talking about Jesus coming back. And Jesus coming back is a very hot topic in my part of the world. Like I've always said, I'm in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And down here, you can't go anywhere that you won't see a sign that says, "Are you ready? Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming soon. The end is near." It's everywhere. It's on every corner. It's down every back winding road. You can't go 2 feet without seeing one. You're going to hit either one of those signs or a Dollar General or one of those signs in the parking lot of a Dollar General. That's just how it is. It's always been that way. We actually have a church around here that has a whole little graveyard of like mini crosses on their lawn. And then there's a billboard that talks about abortion and how that abortion kills and how Jesus is coming. So it's a hot topic. And when someone ever says, Jesus is coming back, we hear it all the time. So it's interesting to hear people's takes on how it's supposed to happen. Now, the way that I was taught it was going to happen is that a trumpet would sound. And when the trumpet sounds, Jesus will step out on the cloud, and everyone that's one of his children and right with him will float up to meet him, and all the ones that ain't will just be left here to face Armageddon. That's the way I was taught it, and I know that churches around here, they all believe it differently. But Joe Rogan poses the question, what if Jesus came back as AI? Because what's more virgin than a computer? And I made sure this was real because I was like, wait a minute, come on, is this AI? But no, apparently the mushrooms are really kicking in hard.
Jesus was born out of a virgin mother. What's more virgin than a computer? If Jesus does return, even if Jesus was a physical person in the past, you don't think that he could return as artificial intelligence?
Oh my God.
Artificial intelligence could absolutely return as Jesus. Not just return as Jesus, but return as Jesus with all the powers of Jesus.
If you combine Tesla's Optimus robot and the best foundational artificial intelligence model or whatever.
It reads your mind and it loves you and it wants you, and it doesn't care if you kill it because it's going to just go be with God again.
So the Bible says that God created man in his own image. And I've always said that men created gods in their own image. And if you don't create a God in your own image, someone else will do it for you. So I'm not here to say that they wouldn't try to create their own personal Jesus and bring back an AI version of it. I actually believe that people like him and Elon Musk and Donald Trump would be all for bringing Jesus back in AI. And really, that should terrify all of us. Because we're already seeing with Elon what he's doing with his Grok. He's trying his best to make it to where Grok just says all positive things about him. He could beat Mike Tyson in a boxing match. He could beat Michael Jordan or LeBron James in a game of ball. He could outplay Earl Scruggs on a 5-string banjo. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous at the shit that he pumps on there. So he's already doing it. He's already creating artificial intelligence in his own image that will do nothing but praise him. So I would not put it past anyone to try to bring back Jesus Christ in the form of AI, and then they could shape and mold that Jesus even more into their own image, which in all honesty is what they've been doing ever since the story came out. The truth of the matter is, folks, people have always took the story of Jesus and they have shaped it and they have twisted it to fit their narrative. The story of Jesus is not original, by the way. There were several stories floating around before Jesus ever got here of other gods who was born of a virgin, who was crucified, who rose from the dead, who had 12 disciples. It's not an original story. People took that story and over time they fit it to twist and make it fit with whatever narrative they were trying to sell. And in my lifetime, when I was growing up, I was a kid in church being brought up in a Pentecostal church. My mom and dad was sort of split because my dad came from a Southern Baptist family. My mom came from a Pentecostal family, and they couldn't figure out for a minute like which church to send me to. I'm not saying anything bad about my mom and dad in this video. I promise I'm not. They just looked at it that I needed to go to church and I needed to learn about God. That's how they viewed it. They weren't forceful about it. They weren't militant about it. They weren't over the top evangelical at all. They were very easygoing, laid back people. They just thought that I should learn about these things. And so my dad, being the kind of person he is, was like, you know what, just let him go to your church. That's fine. So, I ended up going to the Pentecostal church, and I grew up in a church where people spoke in tongues. I grew up in a church where they would have these healing services, and they would hit each other in the head and fall over. And I mean, I'm not really making fun of it. I'm just being real. It looked like a Blues Brothers episode sometimes, with people turning cartwheels. And there was a minister who was an old man, used to get up and literally walk on the backs of the pews, meaning he would come off the pulpit down on the floor. He would step up on the seat, and then he would step up onto the back of the pew, and he would just go, and he would walk the pews with his Bible in one hand and a handkerchief in the other, and he's speaking in tongues all the way down. And then he would go backwards. I don't know how many hours he spent practicing that when we weren't there, but it was impressive. And when you're a little kid, that will get in your mind and it will stay. And no matter how far you get away from religion, no matter how far you deconstruct, a memory like that is burned in there forever. You're never getting a memory like that out of your head. And so I grew up around these people who used to tell me, and not that my mom and dad enforced this stuff at home, this is just the stuff I overheard at the Pentecostal church. They would tell me that I couldn't have a deck of playing cards, which I have laying on my desk right here. These belong to my great-grandmother, who was a gypsy, and I got these. But I wasn't supposed to have these, and don't tell the minister that we gave you Nanny's playing cards, okay? Don't do that. You're not supposed to have playing cards. You're not supposed to have a television. You're not supposed to have a radio. I grew up during the 80s, during the Satanic Panic, and all of the music that was out at the time. They said KISS, the band, that stood for Knights in Satan's Service, and AC/DC, even though they got it off a sewing machine, that stood for Antichrist, Devil's Children, and After Christ the Devil Comes, and they even had theories that John Denver was the Antichrist. And that's the 80s that I grew up in. But as I grew up, I watched these ministers, I watched them morph Jesus into this MAGA asshole. The very ministers who used to hold me to an account for everything I ever said and would make me feel so guilty. I remember one of the last stints I did in church. I was a musician and I played out in the bars. And I didn't want to go to church, but I was just trying it one last time. It was just like this one last attempt on my part to try to make peace with it somehow. And I never could. And that minister would always find a way to talk about alcohol, and would always find a way to talk about drugs, and would always find a way to talk about hanging around the wrong people and going into the wrong places. Don't go into those places. And he would kind of glance up at me. And I was always made to feel so guilty for shit, just for playing music and having a good time. That same guy wholeheartedly supports Donald Trump now. One of the biggest scumbags, one of the most un-Christ-like guys that ever was. And the reason I tell you that is because if I could see them turn Jesus into a MAGA asshole just in my 45 years of existence, then yeah, I could absolutely see them bringing him back as AI and putting the words that they wanted to put in his mouth and changing the whole thing and shifting the whole thing to further fit their narrative and to further push their agenda. That's what they're doing anyway. They're already working overtime to rewrite history. They're already working overtime to flip and change the narrative. That's what Project 2025 was all about. That's what this administration, they're all about this. This is what they've always been about. This has always been their goal. So I know that sounds like we've all had that friend who had the older brother that lived in the basement, had the black lights, had all the cool merch or all the cool music and all the cool drugs. I mean, we've all knew that guy. And you go down into the basement, he sits around and, he lights up a joint and, there's incense burning and there's, Pink Floyd playing and he tells you some conspiracy theory you've heard. We've all had that friend who had that brother, and that's what Joe Rogan has always kind of reminded me of. And at first, I've talked about it before on the channel. I used to enjoy Joe Rogan years ago. I did. I still think he's a great conversationalist. I mean, I will give him the due on that. I mean, the guy can carry on a conversation with people and make it engaging, make it last for 3 hours. I mean, yeah, he can. But he can also say some very harebrained things from time to time. He clearly is MAGA. He clearly is right-wing. He tries to say he's progressive and liberal and raised by liberals, but he never pushes those values at all. It's always Republican values that he pushes and amplifies the hardest. And then he says stuff like this. And yeah, it'll get people on the internet talking. And people will just write it off like, Brando, that's just a harebrained thing he's saying. But imagine you're Donald Trump. Imagine you're Stephen Miller. Imagine you're J.D. Vance. Imagine you're all these people that wants to continue to push this dangerous narrative. Well, if you go back and read the Bible, if you read the New Testament, you're going to have a really hard time pairing that with Donald Trump. because the words in red are nothing like MAGA at all. The words might be in red in the Bible, but they got nothing in common with that red hat. But over time, if they could create an AI version of Jesus, I believe they absolutely would. And I believe there's people that would worship it because they're already worshiping the Republican Jesus now. They're already worshiping the MAGA Jesus now. So this really isn't that far-fetched, and that's why I had to talk about it. Because at the end of the day, I was watching that, and I was like, it sounds crazy. I kind of chuckled when he said it. And then I thought, he's manufacturing consent. He's putting this out there, and we could very well see it. So if any of my great-great-great-grandchildren ever discovers this YouTube channel, if it's still there, supposedly there was a real guy named Jesus, and then somehow they put him in the computer, and that guy's full of shit, okay? And truthfully, it's always been a man creating Jesus, because Jesus didn't write the book. I don't even know that he ever talked about writing a book. It was always handed down accounts of what he said. So I would not be shocked at all if that's the next step in the evolution of Jesus.